This video is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. Modern Horizons 3 is the new straight-to-modern set that brings some fantastic reprints to Modern for the first time, as well as some powerful new cards we've never seen before. So let's go over the top 10 most powerful cards from this set and the decks you should be adding them to. Of course, we have to give some honorary mentions to a few cards. These are cards that might not have a home that they can slot into right away, but will no doubt find a home soon. First, we have the untapped MDFC spell lands. Mono-coloured spells that you can play as tapped lands, or you can pay 3 life to have them come into play untapped. Aside from being fuel for the Belcher, the flexibility these spells offer are unparalleled. I will be very surprised if at least Sink into Stupor and Boggart Trawler don't see some level of play almost immediately. Our next honorary mention is Arena of Glory, a land that effectively only costs 1 red mana on a future turn and gives you 2 hasty red mana in return. Most of the red aggro deck's creatures already have haste and can't really make use of this ability, but this land might be better off suited in decks looking to cast big threats that could take advantage of attacking straight away. A hasty 6/6 Murktide perhaps, or maybe a hasty Ulamog the Defiler. And for our final honorary mention, we have Dreamtide Whale, a 3 mana 7/5 with Vanishing 2, and whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, proliferate. Now, where's the drawback on this card? How is any deck playing blue not looking to cast a bunch of cantrips? And the fact that your opponent can trigger this card, and the fact that you just simply proliferate and not just put a single time counter on the whale, surely this card will have to see some play. Okay, on to the main list. Now, this list isn't in any particular order. This is just 10 powerful cards that you should be keeping an eye out for in your future games. Having said that, let's start with arguably the most powerful card in the whole set, Ugin's Labyrinth. A land that taps for a single colourless, but if you exile a colourless card from your hand with cost 7 or greater when you play it, it taps for 2. And on top of that, you can return the exiled card to your hand by tapping the land. Who would have thought that a land that can tap for 2 mana with a relatively small activation requirement wouldn't be powerful? The deck this land likely ends up in is either Tron or the new Eldrazi deck, 2 decks known for playing 7 or more cost threats. And we're getting plenty of new high cost bombs that could go into either of these decks. Devourer of Destiny, Null Drifter, and even the 3 new Eldrazi Titans. And just for comparison, City of Traitors and Ancient Tomb are 2 of the strongest lands played in Legacy. And we haven't even mentioned that technically exiling a 7-drop from your hand is not really a drawback, but you're simply protecting that card from a Thoughtseize or a Grief. Speaking of cards that cost 7 or more, the second card on the list is Emrakul the World Anew, the latest version of this Eldrazi Titan, a 12 mana 12/12 that on cast you gain control of all creatures target player controls. It has flying, protection from spells, and from permanents that were cast this turn. And when Emrakul the World Anew leaves the battlefield, sacrifice all creatures you control. And finally, it has Madness. If you discard this card, you can pay 6 colourless mana and cast the Emrakul instead. Now, if you want to learn more about what those abilities mean and how you can interact with this card, be sure to watch this explainer. With this card, I think it's really important to focus on 2 things here. Number 1, this card is going to be cast for 6 mana a large majority of the time. Underworld Cookbook and Smuggler's Copter are 2 really efficient ways that allow you to discard Emrakul. Number 2, that protection ability is extremely hard to get around in the current modern meta. Board wipes are far and few between, and most decks are simply running single targeted removal. Once this hits the board, it's very unlikely it's getting removed. Next we have White Orchid Phantom, a 2 mana 2/2 with flying and first strike, and when it ETBs you can destroy up to 1 target non-basic land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. There are 2 ways you can play White Orchid Phantom. The most obvious way is to simply use it on your opponent's Ugin's Labyrinth or Phyrexian Tower. Or you can treat it like mono white ramp and use it on your own Flagstones of Torquir or Indestructible lands. White Orchid Phantom will easily find a home in Death and Taxes style decks, as they often run Flicker Wisp and Eldrazi Displacer to re-trigger effects like Solitude, Thought-Knot Seer, and Skyclave Apparition. With the amount of powerful non-basic lands coming to this set, there is no way that this card doesn't see play. Next, we have two powerful tools that will likely both fit in the same deck: Merfolk. First, we have Harbinger of the Seas, which will henceforth be known as Flood Moon. Flood Moon is a 3-cost 2/2 Merfolk that turns all non-basic lands into islands. Now, for those of you who have somehow never played against a Blood Moon or a Magus of the Moon, this ability completely removes all abilities from non-basic lands and leaves them with tap, add a blue. Shifting Woodlands, island. Monumental Henge, island. Shocklands, all of them are now islands. This can absolutely be devastating for a lot of decks in Modern, and unlike Magus of the Moon, Flood Moon has the oh so important creature type Merfolk, which means thanks to Cavern of Souls, your Flood Moon is not getting countered. If Tron and Eldrazi start to rear their heads, be sure to see a lot of this card. Flood Moon is an excellent card, and because of that, you're going to need a way to protect it, especially when you've tapped out to cast it. Luckily, we have our next new and powerful card, Flare of Denial, a 3-mana counterspell where you can instead sacrifice a non-token creature instead of paying the spell's mana cost. This card, of course, is comparable to Force of Negation from the original Modern Horizons set. However, two things to note. Negation's free alternative casting cost is only active on your opponent's turn, making it weak against removal that is likely to be cast on your turn. And secondly, it can only hit non-creature spells. Flare of Denial gives the Merfolk deck excellent flexibility, as it literally gives you an answer to everything. And cashing in a Tide Shaper or a Merfolk Trickster is a small price to pay to stop your board from being wiped or stopping a crucial combo. Our next card is another excellent stacks piece, Winter Moon, a 2-mana artifact that says players can't untap more than one non-basic land during their untap steps. A clear throwback and homage to Winter Orb and Blood Moon. This artifact is perfect for one of my favourite decks, Mono Red Prison, a deck that literally looks to lock your opponents out of the game by hampering their ability to cast spells and attack with creatures. The deck usually looks to play Blood Moon or Chalice of the Void on turn 2, but now with Winter Moon they have another option. Again, due to all of the great non-basic lands that are coming with Modern Horizons 3, Winter Moon seems like a very powerful card for this meta. Our first flip walker for this list is Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student, and out of all 5 walkers we're getting, this one is by far the easiest to flip. Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student is a 1-mana 0/3 with flying, and whenever she attacks, you investigate. And when you draw your 3rd card in a turn, Tamiyo transforms into Tamiyo, Seasoned Scholar, a 2-loyalty planeswalker that says, +2, until your next turn, whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, it gets -1/-0 until end of turn. And -3, return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. If it's a green card, add 1 mana of any colour. And -7, draw cards equal to half the number of cards in your library rounded up. You get an emblem with "You have no maximum hand size." While Tamiyo's Planeswalker side isn't hugely impactful, getting a Planeswalker in play on turn 2 that will likely have 4 loyalty at the end of the turn is an incredible advantage. It's literally as simple as playing Tamiyo on turn 1, and on turn 2 you draw your card for the turn, attack, and then cast any number of 2-mana spells that draw 2 cards. Chart of Course, Deadly Dispute, Faithful Mending, or one of the countless versions of Thrill of Possibility. And if you're playing a tempo-based deck, I don't think that ultimating Tamiyo is out of the question at all. Tamiyo will easily find a home in any of the blue-red Spellslinger decks like Izzet Control. Next we have Sowing Mycospawn, a 4-mana 3/3 Eldrazi with Kicker 2. When you cast this spell, search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So at its absolute floor, you get a 3/3 body that chooses for a land and puts it into play. And that ability triggers even if the creature gets countered. and it tutors for any land. That could be your last Tron piece or even Urza's Saga to keep the value train flowing. And if you're able to kick the fungus, you get to exile one of your opponent's lands too. And again, it's an on-cast ability, so it's not likely to be countered. And that ability could snipe one of your opponent's Tron lands, or their own Saga, or any other utility land. With Eldrazi decks making a comeback, this card will likely find a home in every one. Back on the topic of lands, we've got another extremely powerful land, Shifting Woodland. A land that comes into play untapped if we control a forest and taps for green, and has an activated ability that's locked behind Delirium. When you have 4 or more card types in your graveyard, you can pay 4 and have Shifting Woodlands become a copy of a permanent card in your graveyard. Firstly, I cannot believe this doesn't have the text, activate only as a sorcery, as this ability is wild. One of the first advanced lessons you learn in Magic is that your graveyard is a second hand, and in Modern, that definitely holds true. Having your best card put into the graveyard is so easy in today's meta, your opponents will even do it for you. Thanks, Grief. So being able to turn your land into a Primeval Titan, a Yawgmoth, a One Ring, or even a massive Eldrazi is super valuable, and you can even do it on your opponent's turn. I love the idea of turning Shifting Woodlands into a Blood Moon on your opponent's turn and shutting off all their mana during their upkeep. Just keep in mind that Shifting Woodlands does not work with Planeswalkers, and it doesn't really work too well with Sagas either. Next, we've got another Flare, Flare of Cultivation, a 3-mana green sorcery that searches up 2 basic lands and puts one into play tapped and the other into your hand. And just like the rest of the cycle, you can cast the spell without paying its mana cost by sacrificing a non-token creature. While Flare of Negation is entirely reactive, this one is entirely proactive, and allows the Amulet Titan decks to have even more explosive turns. On turn 1 you play your land for the turn and cast Arboreal Grazer, putting another land into play. You then sacrifice the Grazer to the Flare, putting another land into play and 1 into your hand, ending turn 1 with 3 lands in play and a guaranteed 4th land to play on turn 2. This card is effectively as powerful as Ugin's Labyrinth. Not only will this card slot nicely into Amulet Titan, I can see this card being extremely effective in 4-color elementals. Flare of Cultivation is practically a free way to get 2 triggers of Omnath. So there we have 10 powerful cards that are launching with Modern Horizons 3. What cards are you most looking forward to? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you learned something, be sure to like the video and subscribe, because if you don't, Wizards will make Eldrazi invade Bloomburrow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.